You're a broke black nobody. Wipe that smile off, or I'll have you dragged out." The heiress's shriek tore through the gala, just as her palm cracked across Victoria Whitmore's face. Sharp, echoing, designed to humiliate. The impact snapped Victoria's head sideways. Heat bloomed under her skin, but she refused to lift a hand to her cheek, refused to give them the satisfaction of a flinch. Cameras pivoted instantly. Investors froze mid-sip. Whispers slithered across the ballroom. "Who let the help wander away from the kitchen?" Charlotte sneered, brushing invisible dust off Victoria's shoulder like she was wiping away a stain. Her parents laughed, slow, indulgent, certain of their power. Richard leaned in close, scotch heavy on his breath. "Apologize to my daughter," he ordered smoothly. "On your knees." They had no idea the survival of their $750 million empire rested entirely in Victoria's next silent decision. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The crystal chandeliers cast elegant shadows across the Whitmore Foundation Winter Gala Ballroom as Victoria Whitmore made her entrance. Her tailored black evening gown commanded attention without seeking it. Behind her, Naomi Park and Gideon Price moved with practiced precision. A united front in an environment where alliances mattered. "Quite the turnout," Naomi murmured, scanning the room filled with New York's elite. Investment bankers in $1,000 tuxedos mingled with tech moguls and old money families. Victoria nodded slightly, her expression revealing nothing. She'd anticipated every detail of this evening, from the strategic positioning of the press to the careful timing of the contract signing. What she hadn't counted on was the raw contempt radiating from Charlotte Harrington's corner of the room. The youngest Harrington made her way through the crowd like she owned it, champagne glass dangling between manicured fingers. Her designer dress probably cost more than most people's cars, but she wore it like armor rather than clothing. "Victoria," Charlotte drawled, positioning herself precisely where 3 photographers had their lenses trained. "So glad you could make it to a proper event." Victoria smiled professionally. "Charlotte, the foundation does remarkable work." "They let anyone run a company now," Charlotte whispered, her voice dripping with disdain. The words were soft enough to seem private, but calculated to carry to nearby ears. Victoria maintained her composure, years of boardroom battles evident in her steady gaze. "Actually, if you're referring to Solara's grid patents, we've revolutionized sustainable energy distribution through proprietary AI integration." "Oh, honey," Charlotte cut her off, voice rising. "Playing quota royalty doesn't make you tech nobility. Some of us earned our place here." The air seemed to freeze. Several donors shifted uncomfortably, but no one intervened. Richard Harrington's deep chuckle echoed from nearby, while Evelyn's perfectly lined lips curved into a smirk. The slap came without warning. Charlotte's hand connected with Victoria's cheek, the crack of it shocking in the suddenly silent room. Phones appeared instantly, recording everything. A few men in expensive suits laughed like they were watching a prize fight. "Know your place," muttered an older investor, just loud enough to be heard. Victoria didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't retaliate. Instead, she went absolutely still, her mind calculating every variable in real time. Her eyes tracked the phones recording the incident, noted the faces of those laughing and those looking away in discomfort. She marked the security stationed at each exit, the angle of every camera. Gideon Price stepped forward, but Victoria's subtle hand signal stopped him. Her dark eyes met his, and she mouthed 2 words, "Ethics review." He nodded once, immediately pulling out his phone and stepping away to make calls. Naomi moved closer to Victoria's side, her presence both protective and professional. "The media's already picking this up," she whispered, glancing at her tablet. "Want me to call PR?" "No," Victoria replied softly. "Let it play out exactly as it is." The master of ceremonies tapped his microphone, drawing attention to the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll please take your seats. We're about to begin the signing ceremony for the historic $750 million merger between Solara Grid and Harrington Energy." Victoria's stillness transformed into something else entirely. A quiet power that made several nearby guests step back instinctively. Her calm wasn't submission. It was calculation. Every step she took toward the stage radiated control, purpose, and absolute certainty. Charlotte's triumphant smirk faltered slightly as Victoria passed her. Richard Harrington raised his champagne glass in a mock toast, but Victoria's measured stride never broke. She was no longer just a CEO in that moment. She was a force of nature disguised in evening wear, her dignity intact, and her mind already several moves ahead. The cameras continued flashing as Victoria ascended the steps to the stage. Each click captured a woman who refused to be diminished by public humiliation. Her cheek still bore the mark of Charlotte's hand, but her expression showed nothing but serene focus. The ballroom buzzed with whispers and speculation. Some guests were already posting the incident on social media, while others tried to gauge which way the power would shift. Through it all, Victoria maintained her composure, her calm becoming more unnerving with each passing second. As she reached the podium, Victoria allowed herself one small smile. Not of happiness, but of absolute certainty. The same documentation-obsessed mindset that had built Solara Grid from nothing had just witnessed her public assault through hundreds of lenses. In this moment, her legendary calm wasn't just a shield, it was about to become a weapon. The ballroom's spotlight felt warm against Victoria's face as she approached the podium. Delaney Hart, the evening's MC, stepped aside with a concerned look. His perfectly pressed tuxedo and practiced smile couldn't hide his uncertainty about what was unfolding. "Before we proceed," Victoria said into the microphone, her voice steady and clear, "I need 5 minutes of everyone's attention." The crystal glasses clinked softly as guests settled into their seats. The Harringtons remained standing, Charlotte still wearing her satisfied smirk, while her parents maintained their poses of practiced superiority. "As CEO of Solara Grid," Victoria continued, "I have a responsibility to our shareholders, our employees, and our mission of ethical energy innovation." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "In light of recent events, I am announcing that Solara Grid is suspending the Harrington merger pending ethical review." The massive screens behind her suddenly flickered to life. Someone's phone video of Charlotte's slap began playing in slow motion. The crack of palm against cheek echoed through the sound system. The footage was crystal clear. Charlotte's sneer, the force of the impact, Victoria's unwavering dignity. Richard Harrington's laugh boomed across the ballroom, too loud and too forced. "Don't be dramatic, Victoria. It was just a little misunderstanding between girls." "She's always been sensitive about these things," Evelyn added, her voice dripping with false concern. She touched her pearls delicately, as if adjusting a weapon. Charlotte, growing bolder with her parents' support, actually waved to the crowd like she was accepting applause at a beauty pageant. Several phones captured her preening, creating even more damaging footage. Victoria's voice cut through the tension like a laser. Section 8.4 of our merger agreement specifically addresses public misconduct by any counterparty. She held up a document, its official seal gleaming under the lights. Such behavior triggers immediate suspension and grants full audit authority to the affected party. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Investors reached for their phones, some already dialing their brokers. Television reporters, who had expected to cover a routine merger announcement, began live-streaming the unfolding drama. "I want to be perfectly clear," Victoria continued, her composure unwavering. "Effective immediately, I am canceling the $750 million deal." Naomi's tablet lit up with stock alerts. She watched the numbers spike, her face showing nothing but professional concern. Meanwhile, Gideon leaned close to Victoria, his voice barely a whisper. "Expect retaliation." The ballroom erupted into chaos. Banking executives huddled in corners, frantically texting. Society photographers abandoned their usual careful poses and started shooting rapidly, capturing every reaction. Charlotte's wave faltered, her hand dropping to her side as the reality of what was happening finally penetrated her entitled bubble. Evelyn's polished facade cracked slightly as she glanced at her husband. Richard's expression had transformed from amused condescension to something darker. He moved toward the stage with the confidence of someone used to getting his way through intimidation. Security stepped forward, but Victoria raised her hand, stopping them. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of being physically blocked. Richard reached the edge of the stage, his expensive cologne not quite masking the smell of scotch on his breath. His smile had vanished completely as he leaned in close, his words intended for Victoria alone, but caught by the still-hot microphone. "You just declared war." The words hung in the air, captured by dozens of devices and broadcast to thousands of followers. Victoria didn't step back. She didn't flinch. She simply stood there, the embodiment of composed strength, letting Richard's threat echo through the sound system and document itself for future reference. The room continued to buzz with activity. Investment bankers loosened their bow ties, already dreading the calls they'd have to make to their clients. Social media influencers who had come for elegant party photos were now frantically updating their stories with breaking business news. Charlotte's former admirers began quietly distancing themselves, sensing the shift in power dynamics. Naomi's tablet kept lighting up with notifications. Stock prices, news alerts, social media mentions all spiking simultaneously. Gideon had already pulled out his phone, coordinating with their legal team. The careful plans they'd prepared for this possibility were now in motion. Through it all, Victoria remained at the podium, her presence commanding the space. She had transformed the stage from a place of planned humiliation into a platform for accountability. The same cameras that had captured her public assault were now documenting her professional resolve. The crystal chandeliers continued to sparkle overhead, their light now illuminating a very different scene than the one the Harringtons had planned. What should have been their moment of triumph had become a very public display of their true character and its consequences. Victoria's heels clicked against the marble floor as she strode down the corridor, her steps measured and purposeful. The ornate wallpaper and gilt-framed portraits of long-dead industrialists seemed to watch her passage with disapproving eyes. Gideon and Naomi flanked her, their phones already out and active. "The ethics clause is ironclad," Gideon muttered, scrolling through documents. "We made sure of that." Before Victoria could respond, Richard Harrington's voice boomed down the hallway. He stood with Evelyn, Charlotte, and Miles Devereaux, their lead investment banker, near an elaborate flower arrangement that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. $200 million, Richard announced, his voice carrying deliberately. "That's the penalty clause for unilateral withdrawal. Your board won't survive that hit." His confident smile returned as he adjusted his gold cufflinks. "Oh, and while we're sharing news, we should mention our family office has acquired 18% of Solara's outstanding shares over the past 6 months." Evelyn's perfectly lined lips curved upward. "We believe in long-term investment strategies." Miles Devereaux cleared his throat, clearly enjoying his role. "The Harrington family has informed me they intend to initiate acquisition proceedings, hostile if necessary." Charlotte broke away from her parents, her designer heels stabbing the carpet as she approached Victoria. Her face was flushed with the particular rage of someone unused to consequences. "You don't belong in rooms built by people like us," she hissed, close enough that Victoria could smell the expensive champagne on her breath. A security guard stationed nearby suddenly became very interested in his earpiece, pretending not to hear. Victoria maintained her composed expression, turning to Gideon. "I want every recording from tonight preserved. All angles, all devices." Her voice was low but clear. "Subpoena the venue's Wi-Fi logs. I want to know who uploaded what and when." She paused, then added, and I need the complete Harrington term sheet attachments. Every side letter. Every amendment. Naomi was already on her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. Harold Klein is calling. Our board chair sounds... She winced at something coming through her earpiece. He's not taking this well. Investors are flooding his line. The corridor felt increasingly crowded as other guests tried to discreetly witness the confrontation. Phone cameras peeked around corners, capturing snippets for social media. The Harringtons seemed to feed off the attention, standing taller, their expressions growing more triumphant. "Victoria!" Richard called out, his voice patronizing. "Let's be reasonable. You're obviously emotional right now. Why don't we—" "The merger agreement," Gideon interrupted, his eyes locked on his tablet, "requires unanimous executive approval." He looked up, a slight smile touching his usually serious face. "And the CEO's veto power is explicitly tied to the ethics clause. No signature from Victoria, no merger. Period." The color drained from Miles Devereaux's face. He quickly pulled out his own phone, presumably to verify this detail his team had somehow missed. Charlotte's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish suddenly finding itself on dry land. Evelyn's hand went to her throat, her fingers clutching at her pearls as if they might provide answers. "That's impossible," Richard growled, his carefully maintained facade cracking. "Our lawyers—" "Your lawyers," Victoria said quietly, "should have read the fine print." The security guard was no longer pretending not to listen. His expression remained professional, but there was something like satisfaction in his eyes as he watched the scene unfold. Camera flashes began popping more frequently from both ends of the corridor. News of the confrontation had spread through the gala, drawing more spectators. The Harringtons' attempt at a private intimidation session had become another public relations nightmare. Victoria checked her watch, a simple, elegant piece that had been her first major purchase after Solara's initial success. "Gideon, start the documentation process. I want every threat, every attempt at coercion recorded and time-stamped." She turned to Naomi. "Call Marcus in PR. Full transparency protocol." "You're making a mistake," Richard said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "You have no idea what you're starting." "No," Victoria replied, her tone unchanged. "I'm finishing something you started." She nodded to her security detail, who quickly moved to escort her toward the exit. As they approached the main doors, camera flashes intensified. Reporters who had been covering the gala shouted questions, their microphones thrust forward like spears. Naomi kept pace with Victoria, her tablet displaying a cascade of alerts. "Victoria," she said softly, "our banking contacts are warning that credit lines might freeze by morning." The cool night air hit them as they stepped outside, the December wind whipping at their formal wear. Car doors opened as their drivers rushed to assist. The cameras kept flashing, capturing every moment of their departure from what should have been Solara's crowning evening. Behind them, through the gala's glass doors, the Harringtons stood in tableau. Richard's face dark with rage, Evelyn's careful mask slipping, and Charlotte's entitled world visibly crumbling around her designer shoes. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Solara Grid's executive floor. But the light did nothing to warm the chill that had settled over the conference room. Victoria sat at the head of the table, her posture perfect despite having barely slept. Multiple screens displayed financial data, news feeds, and social media metrics, none of them encouraging. "The video has over 2 million views," Lena Brooks said, scrolling through her tablet. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she'd been monitoring the situation all night. "But the framing is problematic." Naomi leaned forward, her usually immaculate blazer showing slight wrinkles. "Show us." The main screen filled with headlines. Tech CEO's aggressive response to social faux pas. Harrington heiress. It was just a misunderstanding. Solara Grid stock plunges after CEO's unstable behavior. "They're controlling the narrative," Lena continued, her voice tight. Charlotte Harrington gave 3 interviews this morning. She's calling it playful party drama that got blown out of proportion. Harold Klein's voice crackled through the speakerphone, anxiety making his words sharp. The stock opened down 12%. 12%. And it's still falling. Ethan? Victoria turned to her CFO, who was staring at his laptop with increasing concern. It's not good, Ethan Rowe admitted, running a hand through his graying hair. 3 hedge funds just dumped major positions. Goldman's asking clarifying questions about our Q4 projections. And First National just put our revolving credit line under additional compliance review, which is banker speak for frozen until further notice. Victoria kept her expression neutral, but her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her pen. Specific numbers? We're looking at approximately $180 million in institutional selling pressure since market open, Ethan said. If this continues, his tablet chimed. He read the message and his face fell further. Sandra Pike is on the warpath, he reported. Her exact words, "Old money doesn't lose, especially to you. She's threatening to vote against your re-election at the next shareholder meeting." Naomi muttered something under her breath that sounded distinctly unprofessional. Pike Capital holds what? 4%? 5.2, Ethan corrected. And she's influential with other institutional investors. The hits kept coming. Lena's phone buzzed continuously as she sorted through messages. We're getting pushback from corporate partners. 3 major retailers want to reassess our relationship because we're becoming too political. That's a quote. Too political, Naomi repeated flatly. Because Victoria didn't smile and take a slap in public? Harold's voice rose through the speaker. This is exactly what I warned about. We should have handled this privately. Called it a misunderstanding. Now we're hemorrhaging value because you had to make a point about... Harold, Victoria cut in, her tone quiet but firm. Are you suggesting I should have allowed a public assault to protect the stock price? The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken tensions. Of course not, Harold backpedaled. But there were other ways to... Gideon, Victoria interrupted again, addressing her general counsel who had just entered the room carrying a stack of papers. I need 2 things immediately. A complete legal hold across all communications with Harrington entities going back 18 months, and a defensive proxy strategy in case this escalates to a board fight. Gideon nodded, already making notes. I'll have the hold notice out within the hour. For the proxy defense, I suggest we... A sharp ping from Victoria's laptop cut him off. She glanced at her screen and went very still. Victoria? Naomi asked, concerned. Without speaking, Victoria turned her laptop so the others could see the anonymous email that had just arrived. Subject: Know your place. Message: Detroit girls should stay in Detroit. The conference room temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Lena gasped softly. Ethan's face reddened with anger. Naomi started to speak, but Victoria held up a hand. Gideon, she said calmly, add this to the documentation. Track the IP if possible. She turned to address the room. This isn't about one incident anymore. They're trying to make an example of what happens when someone like me refuses to play by their rules. The board is getting nervous, Harold warned through the speaker. If we don't stabilize the situation, then stabilize it, Victoria replied. Call every board member personally. Remind them that capitulating to racism, veiled or explicit, is not a valid business strategy. She stood, smoothing her jacket. Ethan, work with Treasury to model worst-case liquidity scenarios. Naomi, activate our backup credit facilities, quietly. Lena, prepare a statement emphasizing our focus on governance and operational excellence. Her team quickly began taking notes, but Victoria wasn't finished. And someone get me Charlotte Harrington's complete social media history. Every post, every comment, every photo going back 10 years. She paused. If they want to play dirty, they should remember, Detroit girls know how to fight back. The meeting shifted into focused activity, with each executive tackling their assigned tasks. Screens filled with data, phones buzzed with messages, and the machinery of corporate warfare began to move. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Solara Grid's board conference room. Victoria sat composed at the head of the mahogany table, facing a semicircle of concerned faces. The day's market damage was displayed on screens behind her. Solara's stock down 18%, 3 credit facilities suspended, and institutional investors fleeing. Harold Klein cleared his throat, straightening his tie. After consulting with key stakeholders, we believe a temporary leadership transition might help calm the markets. Temporary leave, Victoria repeated, letting the words hang in the air. Sandra Pike, her designer suit as sharp as her tone, leaned forward. You're too emotional right now, Victoria. This morning's response to the media was aggressive. Donors don't respond well to confrontations. Confrontations, Naomi echoed, her pen tapping against her notepad. Is that what we're calling public assault now? Julian Merritt, who had been quietly observing, interjected. Charlotte Harrington's team reached out. She's willing to make a public apology. We could frame this as a misunderstanding, reinstate the merger, and surrender our audit authority in the process, Victoria finished. She noticed Ethan shift uncomfortably in his chair. The market reaction speaks for itself, Sandra insisted, gesturing at the screens. We're hemorrhaging value because you turned a social faux pas into a corporate crisis. A social faux pas, Victoria repeated, her voice carrying a dangerous calm. Would you characterize it the same way if someone slapped you at a public event, Sandra? Would you call it a faux pas if they laughed about it afterward? Sandra's perfectly lined lips tightened. That's exactly what I mean about emotional responses. Let's focus on solutions, Harold cut in. A temporary step back would show investors we're taking their concerns seriously. Victoria opened a folder in front of her. I have a different proposal. She began distributing documents. A structured timeline for the ethics review, including comprehensive audit scope, detailed investor communications, and a formal board vote to document my veto authority. Victoria, Harold started. The vote goes on record, she continued, establishing clear governance precedent for ethical breaches. The timeline includes forensic review of all Harrington communications, partnership agreements, and environmental compliance records. Julian frowned. That level of scrutiny seems excessive. Does it? Victoria's eyebrow raised slightly. Then you haven't seen page 4. The room fell silent as board members flipped to the referenced page. Sandra's face paled slightly. These allegations, she began, are preliminary, Victoria finished, which is why we need a thorough review. Unless anyone objects to basic due diligence. Ethan cleared his throat. Actually, I should mention something. He looked distinctly uncomfortable. Miles Devereaux called me this afternoon. From First National? Victoria kept her expression neutral, though she noticed Naomi straightening in her chair. He offered me a position, Ethan continued. Senior role, significant equity. He said it would be helpful if I could assist in stabilizing leadership during this transition. The implied threat hung in the air. Help push Victoria out. Get rewarded. Thank you for your honesty, Ethan, Victoria said carefully. She turned to Naomi. Given the sensitive nature of our financial position, I'd like you to implement dual approval on all Treasury movements and financial reporting. Standard crisis protocol. Naomi nodded, understanding the subtext. Watch for betrayal. This is exactly why we need calm leadership right now, Harold insisted. The Harringtons are powerful enemies. The Harringtons, Victoria cut in, miscalculated. They assumed I would prioritize stock price over principle. They assumed I would break under pressure. She looked each board member in the eye. They assumed wrong. Sandra's phone buzzed. She checked it, then smiled thinly. The market closes in 20 minutes. We're down another 3%. How much principal can shareholders afford? Before Victoria could respond, Gideon burst into the room, tablet in hand. His usual composed demeanor was rattled. "We have a problem," he announced. "Someone's shopping accusations to the SEC. I just received a draft subpoena notice from a contact at the commission." "What kind of accusations?" Harold demanded. "Financial irregularities, disclosure violations. They're painting the merger cancellation as market manipulation." Gideon looked at Victoria. "They're trying to turn this into a criminal issue." The room erupted in concerned murmurs. Sandra's smile grew sharper. Julian began typing frantically on his phone. "Enough!" Victoria's voice cut through the chaos. "Gideon, full document preservation protocol. Naomi, activate our crisis communications plan. Ethan," she paused, studying his face, "please prepare a complete report of your conversation with Miles Devereaux. Include all details of the job offer." "You can't seriously continue fighting," Harold protested. "A subpoena changes everything." "No," Victoria replied. "It just confirms what we already knew." She stood, gathering her papers. "They're not trying to win in the market anymore. They're trying to bury us in legal quicksand." Manhattan's lights sparkled beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Victoria's penthouse office, but the view offered little comfort tonight. She sat at her desk, laptop casting a blue glow across her face, while the wall-mounted TV flickered with Grant Holloway's polished smile. "Tonight on Business Focus," Grant's voice filled the room, "we examine the growing controversy at Solara Grid. Is Victoria Whitmore's cancellation of a landmark merger revealing deeper problems?" Naomi's face occupied one corner of Victoria's laptop screen, Lena Brooks in another. Both women watched the segment with barely contained anger. "Sources close to the situation," Grant continued smoothly, "suggest this may be part of a pattern of volatile decision-making." The screen cut to carefully selected clips: Victoria leaving the gala, photographers shouting questions, security pushing through crowds. The editing made her look frantic, unstable. "Is Victoria Whitmore anti-business?" Grant asked, his concerned expression perfectly rehearsed. "Joining us is former energy sector analyst James Barrett." "They're not even trying to hide the hit job," Naomi muttered, typing furiously on her end of the video call. Victoria opened her social media monitoring dashboard. The comments sections were flooding with suspicious activity. New accounts, coordinated messaging, racist undertones wrapped in business criticism. "Look at this," Lena shared her screen, highlighting a Twitter thread. "Supposed former employee claiming you created a culture of intimidation. Account created 3 hours ago. Already has 10,000 followers." "Map it," Victoria instructed, pulling up her own spreadsheet. "Every outlet running these stories, every commentator pushing the narrative. I want to see who's amplifying what, and when." Her fingers flew across the keyboard, building a timeline. Market reactions, media hits, social media waves. Patterns emerged in the chaos. Coordinated drops of negative stories just before trading opened. Strategic leaks to specific journalists known for aggressive coverage. "Found something," Lena announced. "The ad buys pushing these stories? They're coming through shell companies. 3 degrees of separation, but I trace them back to subsidiaries of Harrington Holdings." Victoria nodded, adding the information to her map. "They're not just attacking our reputation. They're trying to strangle our operations." "Speaking of which," Naomi cut in, her face grim, "both TerraTech and Quantum Solutions just canceled their component deliveries, cited supply chain issues, but their CEOs golf with Richard Harrington every month. Without those parts," Victoria started. "We can't complete the Arizona installation," Naomi finished, "which means we default on the contract timeline." Victoria leaned back, studying the growing web of connections on her screen. The Harringtons weren't just fighting back. They were orchestrating a complete siege. Financial pressure, media manipulation, operational sabotage, all moving parts of a single strategy. "Wait," she sat forward suddenly. "The gala footage. The venue's security cameras would have caught everything. Not just the slap, but their reactions, the aftermath." She pulled up her email, searching for the preservation request Gideon had sent. The venue's response made her eyes narrow. Unfortunately, due to a system upgrade, security footage from that evening was accidentally overwritten, she read aloud, within hours of the incident. That's convenient, Naomi scoffed. Too convenient, Victoria agreed. She reached for her phone, typing quickly. Gideon, I need preservation demands filed immediately. Every contractor at the venue that night, security company, IT vendor, cleaning service, anyone who might have witnessed or documented what happened. The TV continued its assault. Grant Holloway was now interviewing a corporate governance expert who questioned whether Victoria's leadership style was appropriate for a company of Solara's size. Lena's face darkened as she monitored the online response. They're flooding every platform with these talking points. It's coordinated, professional. They must have crisis firms working around the clock. Because they're not just trying to win a news cycle, Victoria observed. They're creating a paper trail. Every negative story, every market dip, every operational issue, it's ammunition for their broader strategy. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. First National won't renew our credit line without leadership stability. Board meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. Victoria shared the message with Naomi and Lena. The implications were clear. The Harringtons were closing the noose, pressuring from every angle until the board had no choice but to remove her. They think if they can't buy us, they'll break us, Naomi said quietly. Victoria studied the city lights beyond her window, each one a reminder of the homes and businesses depending on Solara's power grid. In the reflection, she could see the determination hardening in her own eyes. The wall-mounted TV continued its assault, Grant Holloway's voice providing a soundtrack to the siege. When we return, investors question Solara Grid's future as stock hits new lows. Is this the end of Victoria Whitmore's clean energy dream? The Metropolitan Club's oak-paneled dining room reeked of old money and pressed linens. Morning sunlight filtered through heavy curtains, casting shadows across the formal breakfast setting where Victoria sat across from Richard and Evelyn Harrington. Victoria's navy suit was crisp, her posture perfect, a chess player studying the board. She'd positioned herself with clear sightlines to both exits, her phone recording in plain view on the white tablecloth. Coffee, dear? Evelyn's smile was practiced patronage. You look tired. These past days must have been so trying. Black, thank you, Victoria replied, watching the server pour. Her notebook lay open beside her water glass, pen ready. Richard leaned back, adjusting his gold cufflinks. Let's cut through the theater, shall we? This situation has gotten out of hand, but it's not irreparable. Nothing's irreparable with the right checkbook. Isn't that right, Daddy? Charlotte breezed in, fashionably late, Miles Devereaux trailing behind her like an expensive shadow. She dropped into a chair, still wearing oversized sunglasses despite being indoors. Victoria noted how Miles immediately took the seat closest to Richard, a lieutenant reporting for duty. The banker's presence wasn't accidental. Nothing about this breakfast was. We're all reasonable people, Evelyn continued, stirring honey into her tea with a silver spoon. There's no need for this unpleasantness to continue. A quiet settlement, perhaps? Something to help everyone save face? The merger agreement still stands, Richard added. One simple statement from you. I overreacted. And we can put this unfortunate episode behind us. Your investors would certainly appreciate that. Victoria took a deliberate sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch. She could feel Charlotte's smirk behind those designer sunglasses, hear the soft tap-tap-tap of her manicured nails on her phone screen. I appreciate the invitation, Victoria said finally, her voice measured. But I don't think I'm the one who overreacted. Oh, for heaven's sake, Charlotte snapped. Do you know how many strings Daddy had to pull to get you into this room? People like you should be grateful for these opportunities. Victoria made a note in her notebook, time-stamping the comment. Richard's jaw tightened, not at his daughter's words, but at Victoria's documentation of them. Now, Charlotte, Evelyn chided softly, but her eyes held approval. Miles cleared his throat. Ms. Whitmore, speaking purely as a concerned market observer, this situation could become very uncomfortable. Wall Street has a long memory. Companies, even successful ones, can simply disappear. Victoria turned a page in her notebook, writing each word with careful precision. The threat hung in the air like expensive cigar smoke. "You people," Richard said, mask finally slipping, "confuse a seat at the table with ownership of the house. This table, this club, this world, we built it. You're just passing through." Victoria looked up from her notes. "Speaking of building things, I had a question about your waste compliance program. Specifically, the new treatment facilities in Louisiana?" Richard's hand tightened on his water glass. A micro-expression of alarm crossed his face before he could suppress it. "Our environmental record is impeccable," he said flatly. "Every facility meets or exceeds federal standards. Daddy's new processing plant is amazing," Charlotte interjected, clearly bored with the technical turn. "When we visited last month, the local commissioner practically groveled, though the smell near those poor neighborhoods was absolutely horrid." Victoria kept her expression neutral, but internally, she filed away the slip. According to public records, the Louisiana site hadn't had any official visits in 6 months. "Local support is crucial for any development," Richard cut in quickly. "But we shouldn't bore everyone with operational details." "Of course," Victoria agreed mildly, closing her notebook. "Thank you for breakfast." She stood, smoothing her jacket. Evelyn's smile had developed a slight strain. Miles was already reaching for his phone, no doubt preparing to make calls. "Think carefully about your next move," Richard said as Victoria turned to leave. "Some wars aren't worth fighting." Victoria paused at the door where Naomi was waiting. She kept her voice just loud enough for the table to hear. "They're hiding a crime bigger than this deal." The dining room fell silent except for Charlotte's incessant phone tapping. Victoria strode out, Naomi falling into step beside her. Behind them, through the heavy oak door, they could hear Richard barking into his phone. "Get me our environmental compliance team. Now." They crossed the club's marble lobby, past oil paintings of dead industrialists. Victoria's heels clicked against the floor. Steady, unhurried, deliberate, like her strategy, like justice. Victoria stood at the window of Solara's 38th floor legal war room, watching afternoon shadows creep across Manhattan. The morning's fake civility at the club still clung to her like second-hand smoke. "You need to see this," Rosa Delgado said, spreading documents across the conference table. The investigator's usual calm demeanor had an edge of urgency. Calvin Sloan, former environmental engineer at Harrington. He reached out through 3 different back channels requesting protection. Gideon Price looked up from his laptop. Protection from what? "He wouldn't specify over the phone," Rosa replied, pulling up his employment records. "But he mentioned criminal negligence and federal violations. He's scared." Priya Nair swiveled her screen toward Victoria. Satellite images filled the display. Industrial complexes dotting the Louisiana and Mississippi coastline like angry welts. "These are waste processing routes from the past 18 months, Priya explained, fingers flying across her keyboard. "Notice anything strange about the tanker patterns?" Victoria leaned in. "They're all moving at night." "Exactly." Priya overlaid demographic data. "And look where they concentrate. Predominantly black parishes, poor communities, places without political muscle." "Show me the manifests," Victoria said. Priya pulled up shipping records. "Cargo listings don't match facility capacity. They're moving more waste than they're reporting." Gideon stood, pacing as he connected dots. The merger wasn't just about green energy market share, it was legal insulation. "Explain," Victoria said, though her mind was already racing ahead. "If Harrington became part of Solara, their past environmental liabilities would be harder to isolate. They'd be buried under layers of corporate restructuring. Plus, they'd get instant green credibility through your brand." Gideon's voice hardened. "They were using us as a reputation laundering operation." Victoria remembered Charlotte's slip at breakfast about visiting Louisiana. That's why Richard pushed so hard to close quickly. Why they're attacking us so aggressively now. The slap wasn't just racism, Rosa said. It was strategic. Humiliate you publicly, then offer face-saving reconciliation through the merger. Classic pressure tactic. They needed you compromised, Gideon added. Either angry enough to make mistakes, or desperate enough to take the deal despite red flags. Victoria moved to the whiteboard, uncapping a marker. Her hand was steady as she mapped out next steps. First, we secure Calvin Sloan, she said, writing. Full Witness Protection Protocol. Rosa, coordinate with your federal contacts. Already started. Rosa nodded. But he's spooked. Says his home security system has been triggering randomly. Phone's probably tapped. Priya, I want those files duplicated and secured in 3 separate jurisdictions. Encrypted, offline backups. Choose locations the Harringtons can't reach. On it, Priya said, typing rapidly. I'll route through our Singapore and Frankfurt offices first. Gideon, draft emergency motions for evidence preservation. Every document, every email, every text message related to those waste sites. The second they suspect we know, things will start disappearing. What about the EPA? Rosa asked. My contact there, Agent Marisol Grant, specializes in environmental justice cases. She's been trying to build a case against operations like this for years. Victoria considered. Moving too fast could spook the Harringtons into covering their tracks. Too slow meant risking evidence destruction. Make initial contact with Agent Grant, she decided. But keep it quiet. No official filings yet. We need to document everything before they realize we've found their weak spot. Her phone buzzed, a text from Calvin Sloan. 5 words that made her stomach tighten. They're watching my house. Rosa, Victoria said sharply. How fast can you get to Calvin? I can have a team there in 30 minutes. Do it. Now. Victoria turned to Gideon. Draft an emergency protective order. If they're monitoring him, they're already destroying evidence. What if it's not just surveillance? Priya asked quietly. The Harringtons have billions at stake. Victoria thought of Richard's face when she'd mentioned Louisiana. The barely contained panic behind his polished veneer. That's exactly why we move now, she said. Rosa, get Calvin somewhere safe. Priya, start data recovery protocols. Gideon, prepare injunction paperwork. They dispersed with practiced efficiency. Victoria stayed at the whiteboard, studying their plan. The slap that was meant to shame her into submission had instead exposed a decades-long criminal enterprise. She thought of Charlotte's smirk at breakfast, of Richard's casual threats. They'd assumed she would fold under pressure, retreat to save her company. They never considered she might be more dangerous backed into a corner. Her phone buzzed again. Naomi, reporting more stock pressure. Victoria let it ring. The market could wait. Right now, a witness needed protection, and evidence needed preservation. Justice moved at its own pace. The afternoon sun painted Manhattan's towers in amber and shadow. Somewhere in Louisiana, toxic waste was seeping into poor communities while wealthy executives drank $12,000 bottles of wine. But not for much longer. Rosa paused at the door. My team's moving on Calvin's location. We'll have him secured within the hour. Victoria nodded, already focused on the next move. The Harringtons had built their empire on the assumption that money could bury any sin. They were about to learn otherwise. The Manhattan skyline blazed against the darkening sky as Victoria settled into her chair at the head of Solara's executive conference room. Screens flickered to life, displaying Dr. Anika Mehta's composed face from Singapore, where dawn was just breaking. The consortium is prepared to move forward, Dr. Mehta said, her voice clear despite the distance. 14 major utilities across Asia and Europe. Initial framework for distributed solar implementation across 6,000 facilities. Naomi Park leaned forward, tablet in hand. Estimated contract value? First phase, $800 million. Full implementation could exceed $2 billion over 5 years. Victoria watched Ethan Rowe's expression carefully. The CFO's shoulders relaxed slightly. The first time since the gala disaster. Timeline for announcement? Lena Brooks asked, already drafting notes on her laptop. We can formalize preliminary terms within 24 hours, Dr. Mehta replied. My team has completed technical validation. Victoria nodded. Naomi, coordinate with legal on compliance review. Ethan, run the numbers again. I want triple verification on every projection. The market will respond well, Lena said. International expansion, proven technology, stable revenue stream. It's exactly what nervous investors need to see. Draft the release, Victoria instructed. Facts only. No emotional language, no references to recent events. Let the numbers speak for themselves. Lena's fingers moved across her keyboard. Focus on jobs, infrastructure, and clean energy targets? Correct. Send me the draft before it goes to the wire. Victoria's phone buzzed. A message from Agent Marisol Grant. Evidence received. Need formal handoff within 48 hours. Building case. A small victory, but Victoria kept her expression neutral. The Harringtons' toxic dumping evidence would follow proper channels, documented and preserved. Dr. Mehta, Victoria said, please send the term sheet to our Singapore office. We'll route review through multiple jurisdictions to ensure… Victoria. Ethan's voice cut through, sharp with concern. He turned his laptop screen toward her. Someone's trying to access our financial systems. Multiple failed login attempts from unrecognized IPs. Priya Nair's face appeared in a new video window, her usual calm fractured. We're seeing sophisticated phishing attacks targeting board member emails. They're spoofing internal addresses, trying to harvest credentials. Victoria's mind raced through implications. Lock down everything, now. Already enabled emergency MFA protocols, Priya reported. But these aren't amateur hackers. The attacks are coordinated, well-funded. Image every server, Victoria ordered. I want full forensics on those attempts. Ethan, how many systems could be compromised? If they breached our financial database, he shook his head. They could plant false records, delete transaction histories, create evidence of irregularities that don't exist. Naomi, contact all board members. I want every device audited, every email archived, every… Breaking news alerts erupted across their phones and screens simultaneously. The headline hit like a physical blow. SEC opens formal investigation into Solara Grid financial practices. The conference room fell silent. On screen, Dr. Mehta's expression tightened with concern. It's coordinated, Naomi said quietly. The system attacks, the SEC filing. They're trying to bury the Louisiana evidence, Ethan added. Create enough chaos that no one looks at their dumping operations. Victoria stood, her movements deliberate. Priya, I want those server images secured off-site. Multiple copies, multiple locations. Ethan, prepare full financial records for immediate audit. Lena, draft a statement acknowledging the SEC inquiry. We welcome their review and will cooperate fully. The consortium deal? Dr. Mehta asked carefully. Proceeds as planned, Victoria said. We'll add disclosure language about the SEC inquiry to the term sheet. Complete transparency. What about Agent Grant's evidence handoff? Naomi asked. That timeline just accelerated, Victoria replied. The Harringtons think they can drown out their environmental crimes with financial allegations. We prove them wrong by documenting everything. She turned to each team member, her voice steady. They're betting that chaos will make us sloppy. We respond with absolute precision. Every email preserved, every login tracked, every document verified. We build a record so clean that when the truth about Louisiana emerges, no one can claim we're deflecting. Screens flashed with more news alerts as the story spread. Victoria watched her team snap into crisis mode. Priya implementing security protocols, Ethan pulling audit records, Lena crafting careful statements, Naomi coordinating across departments. The Harringtons had just escalated from corporate warfare to federal investigations, but they'd made a crucial mistake. They assumed Victoria would fight back emotionally, make desperate moves to save her company. Instead, she would respond with methodical documentation, preserving evidence of both their attacks and their crimes. Dr. Mehta spoke into the tense silence. "The consortium stands ready to proceed when you give the word, Victoria." Victoria picked up her pen to sign the partner memo, her signature as steady as her resolve. "We proceed now." On all fronts. Red numbers flashed across the trading terminal in Victoria's office. Solara's stock price in free fall. Emergency alerts pinged phones as board members joined the crisis call, their faces grim on the large wall display. "This is exactly what we feared," Harold Klein's voice crackled through the speaker. "The SEC doesn't launch investigations without cause. Victoria, you need to step aside until this settles." Victoria stood at her window, watching lights flicker across Manhattan's skyline. Behind her, Naomi Park tracked the damage on her tablet, while Gideon Price rifled through regulatory documents. "Agreed," Sandra Pike chimed in, her tone dripping with false concern. "This is what happens when leadership gets personal. You let emotion override judgment at that gala, and now—" "The timing isn't coincidental," Naomi cut in. "The investigation launches right as we secure international expansion." Julian Merritt cleared his throat. "The timing doesn't matter. The market is speaking. We're down 18% and falling." Victoria's phone buzzed with another notification. She opened it, her expression unchanging as she read a message containing her childhood address in Detroit, followed by racial slurs and threats. Someone had done their research. "The SEC tip specifically mentions vendor irregularities," Gideon reported, looking up from his papers. "They're focusing on a particular contract from 3 weeks ago." Ethan Rowe's face paled. "The replacement parts supplier? After our usual vendors suddenly couldn't deliver?" "Exactly." Gideon spread documents across Victoria's desk. "The contract was rushed through under emergency protocols when our supply chain mysteriously collapsed. The SEC claims the pricing was inflated, suggesting potential kickbacks." "That's impossible," Ethan protested. "We were desperate for those parts. I vetted them as thoroughly as possible given the timeline." "Wait." Naomi moved to the desk, studying the paperwork. "Show me the ownership structure of that supplier." Gideon pulled up corporate registration documents. "It's a maze of shell companies, but if you follow the thread—" He traced a line through several entities. "It leads to a holding company with ties to Harrington Industries Corporate Counsel." The room went silent. "They sabotaged our supply chain," Victoria said quietly. "Forced us to use their vendor under pressure, then used that contract to trigger an investigation. Making it look like you orchestrated the whole thing," Naomi finished. Sandra's voice cut through the speakers. "This is speculation. The fact remains that this was engineered," Victoria interrupted. "Just like the cyber attacks on our systems, the coordinated media hits, the sudden vendor issues. Regardless of cause," Harold insisted, "we need to protect the company. Victoria, take a voluntary leave. Let us handle." "If Victoria steps down, what happens to the Louisiana evidence?" Naomi asked sharply. Gideon straightened. "Calvin's handoff window. If Victoria loses authority, the Harringtons could block the evidence transfer to federal investigators." "They're not just trying to remove me," Victoria said. "They're trying to bury their environmental crimes. The SEC investigation provides cover, makes any accusations we raise look like desperate deflection." More alerts lit up phones around the room. Online threats against Victoria intensified, many with racist overtones. Trading algorithms triggered additional sell orders as the stock continued its plunge. "The board can't ignore this," Sandra pressed. "We have a fiduciary duty." "Your fiduciary duty includes preventing criminal conspiracy," Gideon countered. "If you force Victoria out now, you're potentially aiding in the cover-up of federal environmental violations." Julian scoffed. That's quite an accusation. Victoria turned from the window, her voice steel. Naomi, lock down every file related to Louisiana. Triple backup everything we have on the Harrington dumping operations. Gideon, prepare detailed timelines showing the coordination between their attacks and our discoveries. Ethan, pull every document related to that vendor contract. I want the full paper trail of how our supply chain was sabotaged. Victoria, Harold warned, if you continue this crusade— This isn't a crusade, she cut in. This is evidence preservation. The Harringtons designed this trap perfectly. Use racist assumptions about angry black women to make my defense look emotional rather than factual. But facts don't care about their assumptions. She met each board member's gaze through the video feed. If I fall now, they win. The environmental crimes stay buried. The communities they poisoned get no justice. And they prove that power requires neither ethics nor innovation, just the ability to destroy anyone who challenges them. The city lights reflected off her office windows, casting shadows across her face as she turned to Gideon. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Tomorrow, we go public. On our terms. The Solara headquarters media room hummed with tension as technicians made final checks on the live stream equipment. Morning sun filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the assembled journalists who had rushed to answer the surprise press announcement. Victoria Whitmore stood quietly at the podium, reviewing her notes while Naomi Park monitored multiple tablets tracking market pre-trading activity. Gideon Price conferred with their technical team, ensuring every screen and document was queued perfectly. Lena Brooks managed the press pool, her expression professional as she fielded aggressive questions. On a secure video feed, Agent Marisol Grant watched intently, her FBI credentials visible against the dark backdrop of her office. 2 minutes to broadcast, the production manager announced. Victoria adjusted her microphone, her burgundy suit pristine, her demeanor calculated and calm. She had not slept, but no trace of fatigue showed on her face. The morning news channels splashed headlines about Solara's stock collapse and the SEC investigation across their tickers. 30 seconds. Naomi stepped close to Victoria. First wave of trading starts in 3 minutes. They're positioning to short us heavily. Good, Victoria replied softly. Let them commit. The red broadcast light blinked on. Victoria addressed the cameras directly, her voice steady and measured. Good morning. I'm Victoria Whitmore, CEO of Solara Grid. I've called this emergency shareholder meeting to address several urgent matters affecting our company's future. She paused, letting the gravity settle. First, regarding yesterday's SEC inquiry announcement. Solara Grid welcomes this review and will provide complete transparency. We have already prepared comprehensive documentation of all vendor relationships, with particular focus on the contracts in question. Screens behind her displayed transaction records and due diligence reports. The timestamp caught reporters' attention. These had been prepared weeks ago. However, this investigation has revealed a larger pattern that shareholders must be made aware of immediately. Victoria nodded to Gideon, who triggered the first data visualization. Complex webs of shell companies appeared, connecting to familiar names. Over the past 3 months, Solara Grid has been the target of coordinated market manipulation. Our analysis traces artificial selling pressure to a network of entities controlled by Richard Harrington and banker Miles Devereaux. Reporters began rapidly typing as transaction timelines appeared, overlaying perfectly with dates of media attacks and vendor disruptions. Note the precise alignment between short-selling activity and planted negative press coverage, Victoria continued. Each surge corresponds to demonstrably false claims distributed through specific outlets. She walked them through the evidence methodically. Smear campaign budgets traced to Harrington shell companies. Vendor contracts revealing deliberate supply chain sabotage. Email timestamps proving coordination. A reporter shot up his hand. Ms. Whitmore, are you suggesting— I am not suggesting, Victoria cut in smoothly. I am demonstrating with documented evidence. But this market manipulation serves a larger purpose beyond financial gain. She nodded to Naomi, who activated the next screen. Satellite imagery appeared showing industrial sites near Louisiana waterways. A protected whistleblower has provided extensive documentation regarding systematic environmental violations by Harrington Energy subsidiaries. These violations specifically targeted vulnerable communities through illegal toxic waste disposal. The room erupted. Victoria raised her hand for silence. The attempted hostile takeover of Solara Grid was designed to prevent this evidence from reaching federal investigators. The merger agreement contained buried clauses that would have given Harrington entities control over all our data systems and legal discovery processes. Agent Grant's video feed shifted to full screen. This is Agent Marisol Grant, EPA Federal Investigation Unit. We can confirm receipt of initial evidence and the opening of a formal review into these allegations. Victoria continued presenting documentation as Naomi monitored market response. The initial wave of short selling slowed, then reversed, as traders processed the implications. Additionally, Victoria said, I am pleased to announce that Solara Grid has finalized a landmark partnership with the Global Renewable Utility Alliance, representing a $1.2 billion expansion of our clean energy infrastructure. Lena's team distributed partnership briefing packets. The stock began to stabilize. This company was built to prove that power and profit can serve innovation rather than exploitation, Victoria stated. We will not be intimidated by those who view ethics as an obstacle rather than a foundation. More hands shot up, but Victoria maintained control. The evidence presented today has been transmitted to the SEC, EPA, and Department of Justice. We expect multiple regulatory bodies to take immediate action. As if on cue, breaking news alerts began flooding phones around the room. Breaking! Federal agents arrive at Harrington Energy headquarters. Urgent! EPA launches criminal investigation into Harrington environmental violations. Victoria stood straight at the podium, her composure unbroken as chaos erupted among the press corps. Questions flew rapid fire. Ms. Whitmore, how long have you been building this case? Will you press charges over the market manipulation? What's the estimated scale of the environmental damage? But Victoria had already made her point. The evidence spoke louder than any defense or denial could. As news tickers shifted from skepticism to breaking coverage of the Harrington investigation, she simply stood steady, letting truth do what violence and threats could not. Agent Marisol Grant spread documents across the federal building's conference room table, her methodical movements reflecting years of environmental crime investigations. Afternoon sun cast harsh shadows through Venetian blinds, illuminating particles of dust dancing above stacks of evidence boxes. U.S. Attorney Daniel Reeves adjusted his reading glasses, frowning at a particularly damning email thread. The audacity is breathtaking, he muttered, reaching for another highlighter. They never expected anyone to see these, Marisol replied, sorting through shipping manifests. Arrogance makes people sloppy. Calvin Sloan sat nervously at the end of the table, his former Harrington employee badge still hanging from his neck out of habit. He pointed to a technical diagram. This shows how they modified the waste treatment processes. See those bypass valves? They're not in any official blueprints. Two EPA investigators, Rodriguez and Matthews, cross-referenced satellite imagery with Calvin's documentation. Red pins on their map marked contamination sites, all in predominantly black parishes. The pattern is undeniable, Rodriguez said, tracing the cluster of markers. They deliberately chose these communities, betting no one would have resources to challenge them. Marisol picked up a transcript, reading Richard Harrington's words aloud. Once we absorb Solara, no one will question us. Environmental compliance is just paperwork when you own the paper trail. Classic conspiracy language, Reeves noted. He's spelling out criminal intent. Calvin pulled up an audio file on his laptop. Richard Harrington's voice filled the room. Those people should thank us for bringing jobs. If a few get sick, that's the price of progress. Besides, who's going to believe them over us? Marisol's jaw tightened. She'd heard this kind of casual cruelty throughout her career, but it still made her blood boil. Timestamp on that recording? 3 weeks ago, Calvin replied. Right after they started positioning for the hostile takeover. The evidence mounted steadily. Falsified environmental impact statements, doctored water quality reports, internal memos joking about midnight dumping runs. Each document strengthened their case. Reeves's phone buzzed with updates from the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. They've mapped the shell companies Victoria Whitmore identified. Multiple violations of securities law. The market manipulation alone could mean serious time. Down the hall, analysts processed thousands of pages of data, building a timeline of systematic exploitation. The Harringtons had spent years perfecting their toxic shell game, always one step ahead of regulators. Until now. Marisol's desk phone lit up. Agent Grant. Judge Harrison signed all warrants, her supervisor reported. Teams are moving now. She exchanged nods with Reeves. Years of investigating environmental crimes had taught her patience, but today's momentum felt different. The evidence was overwhelming, the jurisdiction clear, and, for once, they had a corporate insider willing to testify. Calvin wrung his hands, watching them prepare. Will this really work? These people, they've always been untouchable. Not anymore, Marisol assured him, gathering key documents for the raids. This isn't just about money now. We have criminal environmental violations, fraud, conspiracy, and a CEO they couldn't intimidate, Reeves added, straightening his tie. Across town, Victoria Whitmore maintained her composed presence at Solara headquarters, ignoring a barrage of calls demanding she calm down and stop overreacting. Her phone buzzed with message notifications. Be reasonable, dear. This can all go away. Evelyn Harrington, you're making a serious mistake. Miles Devereaux, don't forget where you came from. Anonymous. She left them all unread. Charlotte Harrington, oblivious to the gathering storm, posted a mocking Instagram story. Some people just can't handle a little criticism, complete with a champagne emoji. The post was still going viral when federal agents entered Harrington Oil's executive offices. Employees froze at their desks as teams of investigators moved efficiently through the building. IT specialists secured servers. Document teams sealed off records rooms. Security cameras captured everything. Richard Harrington's secretary watched in shock as agents entered his office. Sir, I tried to stop them. This is a federal warrant, Marisol announced clearly, holding up the document. Please step aside. Richard reached for his phone. Do you know who I am? One call to Senator. But the lines were already dead. His political connections had suddenly developed selective amnesia. Matthews began photographing documents, while Rodriguez supervised the securing of computers. The machinery of justice, so long stalled by money and influence, finally engaged its gears. Outside, news vans gathered as word spread. Cameras rolled as boxes of evidence emerged. Reporters who'd dismissed Victoria's claims that morning now scrambled to update their stories. The footage played across every network. Richard Harrington, handcuffs glinting in the afternoon sun, being escorted to a waiting federal vehicle. His face, for once, showed something other than smug confidence. Fear. The Solara boardroom felt different that evening. The usual tension had transformed into something new, a current of nervous energy as board members shifted in their seats, checking phones and avoiding eye contact. The Manhattan skyline outside had faded to twilight, its lights reflecting off the glass wall like distant stars. Victoria sat at the head of the table, as composed as ever in her charcoal suit. To her right, Naomi organized stacks of documents with practiced efficiency. Gideon stood ready by the presentation screen, his tablet displaying rows of financial data. Harold Klein cleared his throat. I think we all saw the news today. His voice carried none of its usual authority. The developments with Richard Harrington's arrest. Alleged criminal activity, Sandra Pike cut in quickly, smoothing her silk blouse. We should be precise about terms. Just hours ago, she'd been pushing for Victoria's removal. Now her tone carried a careful distance. Julian Merritt nodded eagerly. Yes, absolutely. And I want to state for the record that any previous conversations with Harrington representatives were purely exploratory. Standard industry networking. Victoria watched them scramble to rewrite history, her expression neutral. She'd seen this before, the swift abandonment of fallen power. But she kept her focus tactical, not personal. Gideon, please share your findings, she said. The General Counsel stepped forward, bringing up a complex diagram of shell companies and wire transfers. We've traced the SEC complaint to its source. The initiating party was Apex Consulting LLC, incorporated in Delaware 3 months ago. He highlighted a series of connections. Their primary banking relationship is with First Atlantic, where Miles Devereaux serves as managing director. Sandra's face tightened. She'd been at a charity lunch with Devereaux just last week. The complaint itself, Gideon continued, contains internal data that could only have come from someone with access to our systems. Which brings us to Mr. Rowe. All eyes turned to Ethan. The CFO sat hunched, his usual confidence deflated. I need to make a full disclosure, he said. 2 weeks ago, Miles Devereaux approached me with an offer. Executive VP position at First Atlantic. 7-figure signing bonus. He swallowed hard. They wanted me to facilitate certain information transfers. Julian inhaled sharply. Jesus, Ethan. I refused, Ethan said firmly. And I kept records of every conversation. He slid a USB drive across the table to Gideon. Call logs, emails, meeting notes. It's all there. I should have reported it immediately. But I was afraid. Victoria studied him for a long moment. Fear, she understood. It was what you did with it that mattered. Naomi took over, pulling up their financial projections. The International Utility Partnership is solid. Combined with our core operations, we have sufficient liquidity for a strategic share repurchase. She highlighted key figures. We can neutralize the hostile position while their assets are frozen. The Harrington stake is toxic now, Julian offered, eager to be helpful. No institutional investor will touch it. Victoria finally spoke. I'm proposing an immediate buyback of up to 20% of outstanding shares, funded through operating cash flow and our new contract revenue. Her voice remained measured, professional. This protects us from any future attempts at hostile accumulation while signaling strength to the market. Harold shifted, then squared his shoulders. As board chair, I want to formally state my complete confidence in Victoria's leadership. Her judgment today has been... He paused, choosing words carefully. Vindicated by events. Sandra jumped in. I second that confidence, unreservedly. The speed of her reversal might have been amusing under other circumstances. Ethan's phone buzzed. He checked it, then looked up. Markets just closed. After-hours trading shows us up 12% already. Make that 15%, Naomi reported, watching her own screen. The numbers kept climbing as investors processed the day's events. They proceeded through the formal vote on the share buyback. It passed unanimously. One by one, board members affirmed their support for Victoria's continuing leadership, each statement carefully worded for future minutes. The meeting continued with technical details, PR strategy, investor communications, regulatory filings. Victoria kept them focused on process and documentation. She had learned early that in corporate warfare, paper trails mattered more than promises. Numbers kept flashing on phones around the table as after-hours trading continued its climb. 18%, 20%. Finally, as they wrapped up procedural items, Naomi's tablet showed the final figure, 22% gain. Sandra gathered her things, pausing by Victoria's chair. I hope you understand. Previous concerns were only about shareholder value. Her attempt at reconciliation felt brittle. Victoria met her eyes. I understand exactly what they were about. Her tone remained professional, but the message was clear. The boardroom slowly emptied. Julian lingered to shake hands, Harold to sign authorizations. Each exit carried the weight of shifted allegiances and recalibrated power calculations. Morning sunlight caught the iron gates of the Harrington estate, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. News vans lined both sides of the private drive, their satellite dishes stretching skyward like mechanical trees. Reporters clustered near the entrance, microphones ready, cameras rolling. Charlotte Harrington emerged from the mansion's heavy oak doors, her designer outfit carefully selected to project composure. But her usual confident strut had lost its swagger. Behind her, Evelyn followed, her face lined with strain despite expert makeup. "Ms. Harrington, what's your response to your father's arrest?" "Charlotte, any comment on the environmental violations?" "Mrs. Harrington, how long did the family know about the toxic dumping?" Evelyn stepped forward, arms crossed. "Our attorneys have advised us not to comment on ongoing legal matters." Her voice carried its usual polish, but a tremor betrayed her uncertainty. Charlotte raised her phone to film herself, attempting to seize control of the narrative. "I want to address the unfortunate incident at the Whitmore Foundation Gala." She pushed her shoulders back, channeling years of media training. The situation with Ms. Whitmore was clearly a misunderstanding that's been blown out of proportion. A reporter from Channel 7 pushed through. "What about the new video that just leaked?" Charlotte's perfectly maintained eyebrows twitched. "What video?" The reporter held up his phone. The footage was crystal clear. Charlotte at the gala, seconds after the slap, wine glass in hand. Her voice carried clearly over the ambient noise. She needed reminding. "Did you see her face?" Following by peals of laughter. Color drained from Charlotte's face. Behind her, Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. "Mrs. Harrington," another reporter called out. "Your family's assets have been frozen pending investigation. How are you handling legal representation?" Evelyn's composure cracked slightly. She'd spent the morning on the phone with their regular law firm, only to discover their retainer couldn't be processed. Decades of relationship meant nothing against frozen accounts. Charlotte's phone began vibrating non-stop in her hand. She looked down as a cascade of alerts stacked across her screen. Cartier terminating her ambassador contract effective immediately. The Metropolitan Museum removing the Harrington family from its board. The Cancer Society Ball Committee demanding her resignation. And Vogue canceling the glossy profile that was supposed to restore her image. Each ping represented another thread of her social fabric unraveling. The empire her grandmother had built through careful social engineering was collapsing in real time. "This is harassment," Charlotte snapped, but her voice wavered. "We're victims of a calculated attack by who?" A voice cut through the crowd. "The communities your family poisoned?" Cameras swiveled to capture a group of protesters approaching the gates. They carried signs with satellite images of contaminated waterways and health statistics from affected parishes. Evelyn grabbed Charlotte's arm. "Inside. Now." But before they could retreat, a federal agent's car pulled up. Two investigators stepped out, holding documents. "Mrs. Harrington," one called, "we need to discuss your role in facilitating certain financial transactions through offshore accounts." Charlotte watched her mother's face go slack. The careful facade of upper-class propriety crumbled as Evelyn realized the investigation had expanded beyond Richard. Meanwhile, across town, Victoria was holding her own press conference. Footage played on a reporter's laptop near the gates. Today, Solara Grid announces a $300 million investment in clean energy infrastructure for communities impacted by environmental injustice, Victoria stated clearly. The Grace Whitmore Community Restoration Initiative, named for my late mother, will focus on areas of Louisiana and Mississippi where corporate negligence has endangered public health. The contrast was stark. Victoria channeling power into restoration, while the Harrington dynasty imploded. Charlotte's phone buzzed again. This time it was her real estate agent. Urgent. Multiple banks. Initiating foreclosure proceedings on properties. Recommend immediate consultation. A court officer approached the gates, posting the first of what would become many notices. The thick paper rustled as he stapled it to the wooden post. Notice of asset seizure and pending auction. Charlotte stared at the notice, remembering how she'd once mocked Victoria's new money status. Now she watched decades of inherited wealth dissolve into frozen accounts and legal papers. Evelyn tried to maintain control. These allegations are baseless. The Harrington name is toxic, a reporter interrupted. Would you care to comment on major donors withdrawing from your charity foundation? More vehicles arrived. Federal agents, financial crimes investigators, environmental protection officers. The sprawling estate that had hosted society's elite for generations was becoming a crime scene. Charlotte's hands shook as she tried to post another defensive statement online. But each attempt at damage control only seemed to fuel public outrage. Comments flooded in. Karma comes for everyone. Environmental racism has consequences. Money can't buy class. Justice for Louisiana. The morning sun climbed higher, throwing the auction notice into sharp relief against the gates that had once symbolized impenetrable privilege. Charlotte stood frozen, watching as investigators carried boxes of documents from her childhood home. Each step they took echoed with the sound of crumbling legacy. The federal courthouse steps gleamed under the midday sun, polished marble worn smooth by decades of footsteps seeking justice. Victoria Whitmore stood at the podium, her posture as precise as the day she'd faced down Charlotte's slap. Beside her, Naomi Park maintained a protective stance while Gideon Price reviewed final documentation. Agent Marisol Grant descended the courthouse steps, her badge catching the light. "The sentencing is complete," she announced, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "Richard Harrington will serve 12 years in federal prison for environmental crimes and securities fraud." Camera shutters clicked rapidly. Reporters jostled for position, their questions overlapping. "Ms. Whitmore, your reaction to the verdict? What about the Louisiana communities? Did you expect this outcome when you canceled the merger?" Victoria adjusted the microphone, her movements deliberate. "The verdict today isn't about personal vindication," she stated. "It's about accountability. For years, the Harrington family poisoned communities while marketing themselves as environmental pioneers. They believed wealth could shield them from consequences." Behind her, screens displayed footage from the courtroom. Richard Harrington, stripped of his custom suits and social armor, stood as the judge read his sentence. His face had aged years in months, arrogance replaced by the stark reality of accountability. "Miles Devereaux," Victoria continued, "has been permanently barred from banking activities. The Securities and Exchange Commission found clear evidence of market manipulation and fraud." Gideon stepped forward with additional details. "Mrs. Evelyn Harrington faces $50 million in personal fines and asset forfeiture for her role in facilitating financial crimes. The court has ordered complete disgorgement of profits linked to environmental violations." A reporter raised her hand. "And Charlotte Harrington?" Victoria's expression remained neutral. "Ms. Harrington avoided prison time, but has lost access to trust funds connected to seized assets. The court determined these funds were substantially derived from illegal activities." Naomi provided context. "The total asset forfeiture exceeds $900 million. These funds will be directed toward environmental remediation and community health programs in affected areas." Agent Grant took the podium. "The EPA's investigation revealed systematic targeting of minority communities for toxic waste disposal. The Harrington case sets a precedent for environmental justice enforcement." More questions flew. What happens to Harrington Energy's assets? How will cleanup be managed? Is this the end of the Harrington dynasty? Victoria raised a hand for quiet. Solara Grid has just finalized a $1.2 billion global expansion contract. Our new partners conducted extensive due diligence. They were drawn to our commitment to ethical operations and transparent governance. Naomi added, international investors have recognized that principle-driven leadership builds sustainable value. A veteran business reporter pushed forward. Ms. Whitmore, do you regret canceling the original $750 million deal? The fallout nearly destroyed your company. The crowd hushed, remembering the viral slap, the market chaos, the smear campaigns. Victoria's response came with measured clarity. I didn't cancel opportunity. I canceled exploitation. Her words carried the same composure she'd shown the night of the gala. But now that composure was backed by vindication. Gideon presented the final statistics. Solara's stock has reached an all-time high. Our clean energy patents have expanded by 40%. Most importantly, our ethical investing criteria have become an industry standard. Victoria surveyed the crowd, noting familiar faces who doubted her during the crisis. When Charlotte Harrington slapped me, she believed she was demonstrating power. What she actually demonstrated was the difference between power and force. Force relies on intimidation. Power comes from integrity. Naomi stepped forward with updates on the Louisiana Initiative. The Grace Whitmore Community Restoration Initiative has already begun installing advanced filtration systems in affected areas. We've partnered with local organizations to provide health screening and environmental monitoring. Agent Grant shared enforcement details. The EPA task force has established permanent oversight protocols. No company, regardless of size or influence, can expect to exploit vulnerable communities without consequences. A young reporter raised her hand. Ms. Whitmore, what would you say to Charlotte Harrington now? Victoria paused, considering. I would say what I've always believed. Real leadership isn't about dominating others. It's about elevating communities. The courthouse steps had witnessed countless victories and defeats, but today they bore witness to transformation. Where the Harringtons had built empire through exploitation, Victoria had rebuilt stronger through principle. Cameras tracked her descent from the podium, capturing the dignity that had remained unbroken since that first confrontation. Naomi fell into step beside her, while Gideon gathered the final documents that had sealed the Harringtons' fate. Your mother would be proud, Naomi said quietly. Victoria smiled, not in triumph but in recognition of journey completed. The path from Detroit public housing to this moment had required more than ambition. It had demanded the courage to stand firm when power tried to bend her. The group moved toward their waiting cars, heading to Solara's new Community Innovation Center. Behind them, the courthouse stood as it always had, but today, its promise of justice felt more tangible, more achievable, more real. Agent Grant watched them go, remembering her first meetings with Victoria during the investigation. She'd seen many corporate leaders face scrutiny, but few had transformed crisis into lasting change. Through the car window, Victoria caught a final glimpse of the courthouse steps where justice had finally been served. The marble still gleamed, but now it reflected something new. The reality that dignity, defended with discipline, could defeat even generational corruption. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.